They say that in the heart of the oldest colleges, where stone meets ivy and time feels like a slow, deep breath, certain places are not merely abandoned, they are waiting. And at Etheria College, a small, prestigious, and deeply ancient campus nestled in the fog-bound woods of coastal Massachusetts, that place was the West Wing of Etheria Hall. The official story, whispered by the dean at every orientation, was always the same: structural integrity. The original West Wing, built on foundations that predated the American Revolution, was allegedly crumbling, too expensive to repair, and thus sealed off, a monument to beautiful decay. But every student knew the truth was much more complicated, more silent, and far colder than settling concrete. Our story begins in the oppressive quiet of a late September evening, as the campus began to settle into its academic rhythm. We meet Alara Vance, a pragmatic and intensely focused history major. Alara believed in sources, evidence, and primary documents. Ghosts, to her, were narrative devices, not actual residents. She saw the West Wing as a fascinating, untouched historical archive, its sealed doors a challenge to her curiosity. "It's not structurally unsound, Marcus," Alara insisted, leaning back against a marble column near the library, the glow of her tablet illuminating her serious face. The official records show 3 separate, fully funded surveys in the last decade, all concluding the building is sound. More than sound, actually. It's built like a fortress. Across from her sat Marcus Davies, a computer science major whose real major was extreme online content creation. He was driven by a thirst for attention and the kind of reckless bravery that only comes with the conviction that nothing truly bad will ever happen to you. Marcus saw the West Wing not as history but as a backdrop, a stage for a viral video. "Exactly, Alara," Marcus countered, a wide, challenging grin splitting his face. "Which means the official story is a complete lie. It's a cover-up. And whatever they're covering up is 10 times better than crumbling masonry. Think of the views, the comments. College dormitory haunted by 1950s ghosts. Live footage." Marcus's obsession had intensified ever since the college maintenance crew, under the cover of a sudden, unexpected weekend shutdown, had secured the old service entrance to the West Wing. They didn't just lock it. They welded a thick, industrial steel plate over the main doors and plastered "Danger, Asbestos and Structural Risk" signs everywhere. The exaggeration felt less like a warning and more like a desperate plea. The conflict began the moment Marcus looked Alara dead in the eye and delivered the dare he'd been building up to all week. "Tonight is the night. No cameras, Alara. Not yet. Just us. We prove the lie. We go inside. Just for 10 minutes. And if you're too scared, the future historian of Etheria Hall can just wait outside." Alara felt the prickle of annoyance and the irresistible tug of pure historical intrigue. She despised Marcus's bravado, but the idea of an unknown history being physically locked away by the college administration was an offense to her discipline. She sighed, her eyes narrowing. "Fine. 10 minutes. No video. But if I see one cobweb that looks like a spooky sheet ghost, we're leaving." Under the cloak of a thick, damp coastal fog that rolled in from the nearby harbor, they made their approach near midnight. The sealed West Wing stood apart from the other, active dormitories, a massive, silent block of Gothic architecture. As they moved closer, the usual sounds of late-night college life, a distant shout, the rumble of a car, seemed to be swallowed whole by the structure's imposing shadow. The entrance they planned to use was an old, poorly sealed loading dock door, hidden behind a cluster of overgrown rhododendron bushes. Marcus, leveraging his tech skills, had spent a day meticulously preparing the aging lock. As he worked, Alara stood guard, and that's when the first truly unnerving detail emerged. An intense, Sudden chill descended upon them, colder and deeper than the ambient night air. It felt like the temperature had plummeted 30 degrees in a single second, raising goosebumps on Alara's arms beneath her thick jacket. Alongside the chill came a faint, metallic scent that Alara, a daughter of a retired chemist, instantly recognized as sulfur. Not a burning smell, but a dry, mineral odor, a scent often associated, in folklore and in the physical world, with deep, subterranean pockets of the earth or something more sinister. "Did you feel that?" Alara whispered, pulling her collar higher. Marcus, focused on the tumblers, merely grunted. "Just the weather, Alara. Old buildings are drafty." But it wasn't a draft. It felt like the building itself was exhaling cold air. And then, from somewhere high above them, deep within the sealed structure, a sound broke the profound silence. It was a delicate, almost saccharine melody, the gentle, repetitive chime of an old-fashioned music box. It played only for 3 short, tinkling seconds before cutting off abruptly, leaving an unnerving echo in the sudden silence. Marcus froze, his hands still on the latch. His bravado momentarily vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. He looked up at the dark, blind windows of the West Wing. That wasn't a draft. Alara felt a wave of icy dread wash over her, a feeling entirely disconnected from historical curiosity. The sound was too clear, too specific to be a hallucination. Felt like a deliberate, solitary greeting. Yet, the lock clicked open, the heavy steel door yielding to Marcus's manipulation with a groan that sounded like a long, painful sigh. Resolution. They stood at the threshold, the entrance to the forbidden wing gaping open before them. The air inside was still and heavy, smelling faintly of dust, decay, and that persistent, dry sulfur. They had achieved their goal. They were inside the structurally unsound Etheria Hall. But the music box and the chilling cold had already confirmed one terrifying fact. This wing was not merely old. It was occupied. The experience served as a sharp, immediate lesson. Some doors are closed for a reason that transcends human law or institutional fear. Sometimes the boundary you choose to cross is not a line on a map, but a shield meant to protect the living from the dead. Alara took one tentative step across the threshold, her practical skepticism battling with the cold dread tightening in her chest. She looked down the dark, dusty corridor, where the floorboards seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the history she was seeking was not written in books, but was still unfolding within these walls. "We have 10 minutes, Marcus," she murmured, her voice barely a breath. "Then we leave." But a more cynical, deeper voice in her mind echoed the title of Marcus's potential video, twisting it into a prophecy. They never left the hostel. The heavy groan of the steel plate door settling back into its frame behind them was the final sound of the world they knew. Inside the sealed West Wing, known formally as Etheria Hall, the silence was total, a suffocating blanket that pressed against their eardrums. It was the silence of a place that hadn't breathed fresh air or welcomed human life in decades. Alara and Marcus stood in the receiving foyer, a once grand space now choked with layers of institutional dust. The air, initially cold with that inexplicable chill and faint sulfur, now settled into a stagnant, humid weight, thick with the smell of old paper and decaying leather. This was the opening act of their forbidden exploration. Marcus, despite his initial flicker of fear at the music box melody, quickly reverted to his role as the reckless pioneer. He reached into his tactical backpack for his powerful, high-lumen flashlight and his smartphone, ready to start documenting their find, video or no video. But the light, which had been fully charged and tested just minutes earlier, refused to cooperate. Marcus flicked the switch again and again, but the beam managed only a faint, sickly orange pulse before dying entirely. His phone, moments ago showing a full battery, now displayed a completely blank screen, unresponsive to any button press. "What in the hell?" Marcus muttered, shaking the devices. He tried to power cycle the phone, then swore under his breath as his portable power bank also remained stubbornly dark. "They're dead. All of them. My gear is military-grade Elara. This shouldn't happen." Elara, who carried only a small, standard-issue university light, watched her own device dim momentarily, then stabilize to a weak, reliable yellow glow. She realized the chilling implication. The atmosphere of the sealed wing was not merely hostile to life, but specifically hostile to modern technology, as if the energy of the place was drawing power away from anything invented after a certain date. The failure of the technology only deepened Elara's unease, shifting her perspective from curious historian to reluctant trespasser. This was no longer just about dusty records. This was supernatural interference. Her mind raced back to an encounter she'd had a week earlier, while researching Etheria Hall's architectural plans in the college archives. Flashback narrative. The curator's warning. The college curator, a frail but fiercely perceptive man named Mr. Silas, had been hesitant to even speak about the West Wing. His office was cluttered, smelling of old leather and tea, and filled with forgotten portraits of college founders. "The hall is closed, Miss Vance," Mr. Silas had said, his voice a dry rasp, his eyes, deep-set and weary, avoiding hers. "It has been closed since 1957. Officially, it was the structural integrity, yes. But unofficially, well, there was an event." Elara had pressed him, citing the rumors of the students who simply vanished. The Etheria Five, they called them. They went to a dance in that wing and never came out. "What happened, Mr. Silas?" The old man had finally met her gaze, and in his eyes, Elara saw not academic aloofness, but genuine fear. "They say they were caught in an unfinished pattern, child. They tried to bind something to the hall, a way to keep its history safe, sacred, a part of themselves. But their attempt was broken, betrayed. And now the hall keeps them instead. The students think they have left, but their sense of belonging is still tethered to that place. The hall is waiting for new threads to weave the pattern." "Waiting for what?" Elara had asked, chilled by his cryptic tone. "Waiting for someone with ambition, or someone with profound curiosity," he'd whispered, tapping a long, bony finger on a faded blueprint of the hall's third floor. "The hall is hungry for the kind of energy the world only starts producing again every few generations. If you ever see the blue light, Miss Vance, run. It means the hall has chosen its new dancers." End flashback. "Elara? You okay?" Marcus's voice snapped her back to the sulfur-scented present. She shook her head, dismissing the chilling memory. "It means we stick together and rely on this," she said, holding up her weak but persistent light. "The hall doesn't like new things. It wants us to be lost in its time." They started down the main corridor, a tunnel of shadow broken only by Elara's sputtering light. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, a hideous, Baroque pattern of crimson and gold, and framed photos of long-dead college benefactors, whose eyes, in the fleeting light, seemed to track their movements. They had reached the middle of the corridor, where the air felt coldest when Marcus stopped, his whole body rigid. He wasn't looking at the portraits. He was looking up, through the open central stairwell that rose into the darkness of the sealed upper floors. "Look," he breathed, his voice stripped of all its usual annoying swagger. High above them, near the level of the third floor, a tiny, intermittent flicker of light appeared in one of the tall windows. It was an unmistakable, haunting shade of cold blue. It wasn't electricity. It had the soft, diffused quality of phosphorus or gaslight, ancient and ethereal. The ghost light. The light moved, gliding slowly from one window to the next, like a lantern carried by someone on a slow, purposeful patrol. It cast no shadows. In fact, it seemed to absorb the shadows around it, creating a pocket of absolute, profound coldness wherever it passed. "The Etheria 5, Alara whispered, the words Mr. Silas had used returning with terrifying clarity. "The hall is waiting for new threads to weave the pattern." The blue light was the signature of the missing students, their lingering presence trapped between worlds, forever seeking the completion of their failed ritual. They watched as the blue light paused directly over the landing of the third floor. The music box melody from Part 1 did not play this time, but they felt a heavy, almost magnetic pull toward the stairwell. Marcus, despite his fear, felt the pull of the story, the proof of the supernatural right there above him. Alara felt the pull of the truth, the need to see what the vanished students had left behind. "We have to see where it came from," Marcus argued, fear fighting with adrenaline. "This is it, Alara. The source." Alara nodded slowly, her hand instinctively clutching the worn leather strap of her history satchel. "The stairs are blocked on the second floor. I remember that from the blueprints. There must be a service ladder, a maintenance route, something hidden." Scouting the main foyer again, Alara noticed a subtle anomaly. A section of the wall near the old elevator shaft that wasn't covered in the peeling wallpaper. It was covered in a thick, slightly newer wood paneling. Pushing against it, they discovered a narrow, almost secret doorway leading to a tightly winding iron staircase. The original service access to the residential floors, kept out of sight. Resolution. They had found their way deeper, drawn by the spectral glow and the promise of uncovering the fate of the Etheria 5. The cold blue light was their guide, beckoning them toward the third floor and the heart of the hall's secrets. They knew they were acting against every sensible warning, but their combined need for proof and historical closure was a stronger current than common sense. The true lesson of the moment was clear. Respect the past, especially when it gives you explicit warnings. When the door you forced open leads to a place that deliberately drains the power of the modern world, turn back. When the light you follow is the beacon of the dead, you are already walking into a trap. Alara placed her foot on the cold, iron spiral stairs, the metal groaning under her weight. She knew Mr. Silas's warning about the unfinished pattern was no folklore, but a technical instruction. They were now the new threads. As she looked up the dark, coiling path, the faint blue light flickered once more, seeming to welcome them. What tragic pattern were the students weaving? And what would happen to Alara and Marcus when the hall finally tried to finish it? The iron service stairs were a painful ascent, steep, claustrophobic, and ringing with every cautious step. When Alara and Marcus finally reached the third floor landing, they were met with a view that was immediately profoundly wrong. This was the floor that housed the infamous Room 313, the supposed epicenter of the 1957 vanishings, according to the archived rumors. The air here was dramatically colder, the metallic tang of sulfur more pronounced, but what seized their attention was the sight of the corridor itself. It was the residential wing, lined with dorm room doors, but it extended into the distance with a terrifying optical illusion. Instead of the usual short hall of a typical college building, this corridor seemed to stretch on forever. The doors on either side, all identically numbered, though the numbers were obscured by grime, receded into a vanishing point that defied the known dimensions of the hall. It was as if the wing had been stretched thin, unnaturally prolonged by some invisible, horrifying force. This isn't right," Marcus stammered, his small light catching the dust motes suspended in the dead air. "The blueprints show this floor is only supposed to have 12 rooms. 12, Alara. We should be able to see the end wall. But that, he pointed into the gloom, where the corridor turned into a nebulous blur. That's going on for miles. Elara felt the unsettling pull of non-Euclidean geometry, the disturbing feeling that the space they occupied was being manipulated by an intelligence beyond physics. The hall, she realized, wasn't just old. It was elastic, bending its own reality to confuse and contain trespassers. The doors flanking them all looked exactly alike. Thick, dark oak, each with a small, tarnished brass knob. They began to walk, their footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the dusty floorboards. They counted, slowly, meticulously, 13, 14, 15. They passed the point where the corridor should have ended, yet it continued to spool out before them, an infinite gallery of identical, sealed bedrooms. Then they found it, room 313, stood out not by design, but by state. It was the only door whose brass knob had been replaced with a heavy-duty, modern steel deadbolt, the kind of lock you'd find on a bank vault, not a college dorm room. This modern security measure felt like a desperate, human attempt to contain a supernatural problem, a boundary drawn by fear. As they stood before room 313, the sound of the ghost light, the music box, and even the sulfur scent faded into the background, replaced by something much more immediate and terrifying, the sound of whispers. The sound started softly, like air escaping a cracked pipe, but quickly resolved into distinct, human voices, numerous voices, seemingly emanating from the end of the impossible corridor, echoing down the endless length toward them. But the most chilling part was what the voices were saying. Marcus, come back. Elara, it's not safe. We're waiting, Elara Vance. The whispers were not random ghostly moans. They were using their names. The voices sounded familiar, perhaps like classmates, or maybe even their own mothers, soft, caring, and entirely fabricated by the hall. The spectral occupants of the corridor were trying to lure them away from room 313, perhaps because the room held the key to their curse, or because it was the precise center of their imprisonment. Marcus grabbed Elara's arm, his eyes wide and panicked, the thrill-seeker replaced entirely by the terrified college student. They know us. How do they know our names? Elara, we have to go back. We have to follow the voices. They sound comforting. No, Elara hissed, pulling her arm away. That's how they get you. Mr. Silas said they seek belonging. They aren't comforting. They're imitating comfort. They want us to join their eternal club. The hall is trying to lead us down that corridor to make us one of the forgotten rooms. She pointed her weak light at the heavy deadbolt on room 313. If the college put that much effort into keeping us out of this one room, that's where the truth is. That's the center of the pattern. Marcus, driven by panic, was still torn between escape and solving the mystery. But how do we open that? It's a vault lock. We don't have time to break it. The voices are getting louder. The whispers intensified, now sounding pleading, almost demanding. They were trying to create a sense of shared emergency, a need for Elara and Marcus to rush to their supposed rescue. Elara's historian's mind took over, focusing on the past, not the immediate fear. She looked at the door. It's a modern lock. They sealed the main door with an antique lock and this one with a modern deadbolt. Why? Because the original lock was removed, probably by the missing students. We don't need to pick the deadbolt, Marcus. We need to find the old keyhole. She ran her hand over the aged oak, feeling for an anomaly. Sure enough, hidden beneath a sliver of peeling paint, she found the circular depression of the original 1950s lock mechanism. It was not a keyhole, but a clean, empty space, a perfect circle of missing material. The students had taken the core piece. They didn't lock it in the traditional sense, Elara realized. They took the lock mechanism with them when they performed the ritual. The hall sees this as unlocked in its time. The deadbolt is just a distraction. She quickly pulled a heavy, solid piece of metal from her satchel, a broken piece of the hall's original weather vane, which she had found earlier near the loading dock, keeping it as a historical curiosity. She lodged the point of the metal into the shallow recess where the lock mechanism had been and used the length of the staff as leverage. With a final, terrible creak, a sound that momentarily drowned out the pleading whispers, the door of room 313 swung inward on perfectly silent hinges. Resolution. They had overcome the architectural deception and the auditory psychological trap. They were now standing at the threshold of the most forbidden place in the hall, the preserved epicenter of the 1957 vanishings. The whispers instantly ceased, replaced by a profound, expectant silence that felt more dangerous than the noise. The moral lesson of this act was a hard-won truth. Be honest about your fear, but let courage be guided by logic, not reckless impulse. The supernatural will lure you with false comfort, the familiar voices, or paralyze you with impossible illusions, the endless corridor. Focus on the anomaly, the single break in the pattern, the modern lock, to find the path forward. Alara took a deep, shaky breath, her flashlight beam piercing the air of the room. No cameras, Marcus. You promised. Marcus, his face pale but his eyes now burning with a terrified but renewed sense of mission, only nodded, dropping his useless electronics. I just want to know why they never left. The hall, having failed to divert them, now waited for them to step across the final boundary. They looked into the room, their light revealing the perfectly preserved, vintage 1950s interior, waiting in silence. What terrifying scene awaited them in room 313? And what did the hall intend to take from them now that they had reached the center of its prison? The air inside room 313 was perfectly still, devoid of the dust motes and stale smells that permeated the corridor outside. It was a time capsule, meticulously preserved as if the occupants had simply stepped out for a moment, intending to return. The single beam of Alara's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a scene from another era. The room was furnished with heavy, dark wood furniture. A sturdy desk piled with textbooks, a straight-backed chair, and a single twin bed with a neatly folded, chenille bedspread. A rotary telephone sat on a bedside table, next to an open copy of The Catcher in the Rye. Clothes, crisp and clean in their 1950s style, hung in an open closet, waiting to be worn. There was no sign of struggle, no frantic mess, just an eerie, untouched domesticity. It's perfect, Alara whispered, stepping cautiously into the room. She picked up a pristine copy of a college newspaper from the desk. The date was October 27th, 1957. They vanished a day or two after this date. This room truly stopped existing the moment they did. Her historian's mind was reeling. This was an unparalleled glimpse into the very moment of their disappearance. Marcus, however, was drawn to something else. Leaning against the far wall, between the window and the closet, was a tall, ornate standing mirror. Its frame was dark, carved wood, intricately detailed, and its surface was slightly warped, giving reflections a subtle, antique distortion. It seemed out of place among the utilitarian dorm furniture, more like an heirloom than a college possession. Alara, check this out, Marcus said, his voice hushed, devoid of its usual bluster. He stood before the mirror, his own reflection appearing, then wavering slightly. Alara joined him, her weak flashlight beam now focused on the mirror's surface. As they both looked, a profound chill, colder than any they had felt yet, emanated directly from the glass. It was the chill of absolute zero, biting deep into their bones. Then the mirror began to work its magic. Their reflections wavered, then subtly shifted. Marcus's modern hoodie and jeans were replaced by a crisp, argyle sweater vest and tailored trousers. His spiky, contemporary haircut smoothed into a neat, parted style. Alara's practical jeans and hiking boots gave way to a voluminous swing skirt and saddle shoes, her usually severe ponytail transforming into soft, victory rolls. They were looking at themselves, but also not themselves. They were looking at their reflections as they might have appeared in 1957, their faces subtly altering to match the softer, more innocent features of the era. And then, as the shift completed, a wave of palpable, unreasoning terror washed over their reflected faces. Their own eyes, in the mirror, widened with a silent scream, contorting into expressions of pure, unadulterated panic, their mouths open in a soundless cry. "My God!" Alara breathed, stepping back abruptly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ghostly reflection of terror lingered for a fraction of a second before her own modern, shaken face reappeared. Marcus stumbled backward as well, bumping into the desk. What was that? I could feel it. That fear. It was like it was my own. Their fear. What happened to them? The mirror was clearly a nexus, a window not just to their past selves, but to the very emotions of the vanished students. It was showing them the final moments of the Etheria 5, imprinted onto their own visages. Mr. Silas's words about the unfinished pattern and the students being tethered to the hall clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The hall wasn't merely haunted. It was a cosmic anchor, capturing souls and projecting their last, desperate emotions. Alara knew with a terrible certainty that the curse wasn't just about making students disappear. It was about trapping their very essence, their final terrified moments, and forcing future trespassers to experience it. The hall was a machine that recycled dread. "This mirror," Alara said, her voice strained. "It's not just showing us how they looked, it's showing us how they felt. This hall, it captures the essence of fear. It wants us to feel what they felt." She looked back at the reflection, now thankfully showing only her own terrified but determined face. But as she stared, she could still see the ghost of the 1957 girl's eyes, wide with unspeakable horror, just beneath her own. It was a layer of suffering, forever trapped. The implications were profound and chilling. The Etheria 5 weren't just ghosts. They were echoes, reverberations of a moment frozen in time, and the hall was forcing Alara and Marcus to experience that moment. This wasn't about specters. It was about shared psychological trauma, an endless loop of terror. Resolution. They had discovered the true nature of the curse. A psychic tether, a binding ritual gone wrong that forced the vanished students to relive their final moments, projected onto anyone who dared to invade their space. The mirror was the key, a direct conduit to their suffering, an emotional anchor for the souls trapped within the hall. The moral lesson here was stark. Empathy, while a virtue, can also be a terrifying burden when confronted with ancient curses. Understanding the suffering of the past can, in a place like Etheria Hall, make you an unwilling participant in that suffering. The hall binds souls, and by stepping into their shoes, even for a moment, Alara and Marcus had unknowingly allowed a piece of that binding to begin with them. Alara turned from the mirror, her face grim. "They're still here, Marcus. Not just as ghosts. Their fear, their panic, it's imprinted on this place. And the hall wants us to wear it." Marcus, still reeling from the vision, could only nod, his eyes fixed on the mirror. The silence in the room was now heavy with the weight of unseen presences, the palpable dread of the 1957 students clinging to every surface. They were no longer merely observers. They were becoming potential players in a very old, very cruel game. What was the origin of this unfinished pattern that trapped the souls? And what would Marcus do with the knowledge he craved, now that it was steeped in such profound terror? The fear projected by the mirror had done its work, shaking Marcus and Alara to their core. Yet, in the face of profound supernatural horror, the initial drivers that brought them there, Alara's historical curiosity and Marcus's desperate need for validation, remained. For Marcus, the terror was immediately overwritten by the thrilling confirmation that this was real. This was a story, and he had reached its absolute center. He ignored Alara's warnings about the room's psychic tether and moved toward the desk, his hands hovering over the decades of undisturbed dust. "The history major in me says look at the books," he muttered, his voice still shaky but regaining its assertive edge. "The YouTuber in me says look for the proof." He carefully lifted a stack of old textbooks, revealing a hidden item underneath. A small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by constant handling. It wasn't the uniform, institutional kind. It was clearly personal, a diary. "Jack's journal," Marcus whispered, reading the name delicately scrawled on the frontispiece. "One of the Etheria 5. He must have been the last one here." Alara rushed over, her historian's interest overriding her fear. A personal account could finally explain the unfinished pattern. Marcus flipped through the yellowed pages, finding the final entries, which were written in a frantic, hurried hand. The entries described the 5 students' intention to perform a complex, arcane ritual. They weren't trying to raise the dead. They were attempting to bind a powerful, protective ward to the entire West Wing, believing the hall contained a portal to something volatile that needed to be contained for the safety of the college. October 26th, 57. We have the components. The binding must happen in 313, at the moment of the full eclipse. The final step is the hardest, the exchange of belonging. We must all agree to never truly leave the hall, to leave a piece of our future here, in order to guarantee its safety. October 27th, 57. Betrayal. John panicked. He tore the final symbol, the symbol of perpetual closure, from the script. He ran. The ward collapsed. It didn't bind the evil. It bound us. It turned the hall into a prison. We are the perpetual closure now. We never left. No one can ever leave. Marcus finished reading the final, smeared words, a look of shocked comprehension washing over his face. They weren't cursed by something evil, he realized aloud. They were cursed by their own good intention. They sacrificed their future to protect the place, but one of them broke the circuit. This revelation was profound, but Marcus, in his adrenaline-fueled state of winning the mystery, made a catastrophic error. He looked down at the entry describing the betrayal, the tearing of the symbol of perpetual closure, and scoffed. A symbol? Seriously? They risked their lives and their souls over a drawing. Marcus laughed. A short, nervous, entirely disrespectful sound that echoed harshly in the silent room. He tapped the page with the journal, his finger landing on the drawing the student had been trying to recreate, the drawing representing the broken symbol of perpetual closure. "Look at this thing," he continued, completely disregarding Alara's look of horror. "It looks like a kid's drawing of a sun. What power could this possibly hold?" And then, in a moment of utter reckless hubris, Marcus, wanting to demonstrate the absurdity of the historical fear, gave a sharp, mocking tug on the page. The old paper, brittle with age and supernatural energy, ripped cleanly away from the spine of the journal, severing the symbol of perpetual closure from its context. The page fluttered to the floor. The reaction of the hall was immediate and terrifyingly physical. The dry, mineral smell of sulfur that had been lingering since Part 1 intensified, becoming acrid, metallic, and overwhelming, stinging their eyes. The soft yellow light from Alara's flashlight suddenly died. This time completely, irrevocably. They were plunged into absolute, inky darkness. A low, resonant groan, like the ancient stone foundations of the entire college shifting under immense pressure, shook the room. The sound was not outside. It came from the very walls, the floor, and the ceiling. Then, with a deafening final thud, they heard the sound of a massive, heavy door sealing shut. Not the sound of the corridor door of 313, but the sound of the entire third-floor corridor closing off behind them. The non-Euclidean, infinite hall had finally completed its circuit. They fumbled blindly for each other in the darkness, their hearts pounding in their chests. When Alara finally managed to find Marcus's arm, she squeezed it hard, her voice a desperate whisper. "Marcus, what did you do?" I just ripped the page," he gasped, his voice tight with pure panic. "It was an accident. I just wanted to show." "You didn't just rip paper, Marcus," Alara cried, her voice cracking with terror and fury. "You replicated the act of betrayal. You broke the pattern again. That hall is a prison, and you just sealed our cell." They were trapped in room 313. The broken symbol, lying forgotten on the floor, was proof of Marcus's profound disrespect for the power of belief and history. His arrogance had not only endangered them, but had validated the very curse the hall was built upon. Resolution. Marcus's reckless arrogance and mockery of the sacred history of the hall led to the immediate and terrifying consequence of their physical imprisonment. The hall had reacted to the disrespect, sealing the endless corridor and cutting off their only escape route. They were now at the mercy of the ancient, volatile energy trapped within the West Wing. The moral lesson was immediate and devastating. Humility is not merely a virtue. It is a necessity when dealing with the unknown. Reckless arrogance and mockery of the unknown, especially of things held sacred by others, even the dead, have tangible physical consequences. Marcus's desire for proof over respect has sealed their fate. In the profound darkness of room 313, Alara felt the sulfur scent grow stronger, accompanied by a new, faint vibration in the floor, a rhythmic, unsettling pulse. They were trapped, and the hall was preparing its next move. The hall had its new dancers. What ancient, macabre ritual was about to begin in the common areas? And how would Alara's knowledge help them survive a dance they were never meant to join? Plunged into the absolute, smothering darkness of room 313, Alara and Marcus were momentarily paralyzed by the crushing silence that followed the heavy thud of the corridor ceiling shut. The air, thick with sulfur, felt less like gas and more like a heavy, caustic veil. Alara's mind, despite the terror, was racing. The diary mentioned the exchange of belonging ritual and the fact that the hall wanted to bind souls. The darkness wasn't just a loss of light. It was the hall's way of forcing them to rely entirely on their other senses, making them vulnerable to suggestion. She pulled Marcus tight, her voice a desperate command. "Get off the floor. Don't touch that page." She guided him by feel, stumbling toward the bed, knowing that the ripped page, the broken symbol of perpetual closure, was the catalyst for the hall's current aggression. The moment they settled onto the dusty mattress, the profound silence was broken by the sound of the rhythmic pulse they had heard earlier. A deep, resonant thump-thump-thump vibrating up through the floorboards. It was the sound of footsteps, a slow, coordinated march coming from somewhere nearby. "Where is that coming from?" Marcus whispered, his breath ragged. "It sounds like it's right outside the room." "It's the common area," Alara realized, connecting the sounds to the blueprints she'd memorized. "The lounge. It runs parallel to this wing. That's where the original dance was happening before they came here for the ritual." And then, accompanying the rhythmic steps, came a sound far more unsettling than the earlier music box melody. A low, humming chord, mournful and strange, followed by the faint, muffled sound of a jazz ensemble. A distant, distorted arrangement of a 1950s standard. It sounded warped, slowed down, and profoundly sad, like music played underwater. Alara fumbled with the desk, finding a heavy, marble paperweight. Using its weight, she quickly rapped against the wall of the room, seeking to locate the access door. She found it, an interior door, hidden behind the closet in room 313, likely a connection to the common lounge for socializing during the 1950s. She shoved the closet door open and pushed at the flimsy, secondary door. It gave way with a low squeal, and a stream of the strangest illumination spilled into the room. It wasn't the blue light from the windows, nor was it electric light. It was a pale, shifting luminous mist, an ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from the air itself. They crept to the doorway and peered out. The common lounge was enormous, spanning the entire width of the wing. In the center, under the hazy, pulsing spectral light, were the spectral figures of the Etheria Five. They were not translucent, shimmering ghosts, but rather cold, solid-looking figures, rendered in the faded sepia tones of an old photograph. They wore the formal wear of 1957 dresses and suits, their faces locked in expressions of profound, silent suffering. They weren't dancing joyously. They were moving in a slow, macabre, silent pattern. It was a choreographed, repeating walk toward the very center of the room, where the air was coldest and thickest with sulfur. They moved with mechanical precision, their eyes vacant, performing the ritual of belonging for eternity. The terror peaked as Alara watched one of the figures, a young man with meticulously parted hair, slowly turn his head and look directly at the doorway of room 313. His face was a mask of cold, aching sadness, and his eyes, though empty, locked onto them. He slowly extended a hand, palm up, not in a threatening gesture, but in an invitation, a plea for them to join the dance, to complete the unfinished pattern the journal had described. The supernatural element was clear. These figures were cold to the touch and emanated profound sadness because they were trapped. They didn't want to hurt Alara and Marcus. They wanted them to join their ranks to finish the failed ritual and finally find rest. Or perhaps, simply to share the misery. "They want us to join them," Alara whispered, pulling Marcus back from the threshold. "They're trying to weave us in. They need two more. We can't let them touch us. Don't look at their hands, Marcus. They'll pull your desire for belonging right out of you." Marcus, though terrified, was fascinated by the sheer horror of the sight. "But if we just walk around them, we can get to the main stairs on the other side. They're just dancing, right?" As if in response to his suggestion, the spectral figures shifted their pattern. The distance between them subtly shrank, and their pace, while still slow, became more deliberate, encircling the center of the room. The music, though faint, seemed to draw them closer to the common area, making it impossible to slip past without entering the sphere of the dance. The realization settled on Alara. This was a supernatural trap. They couldn't move around them. They had to break the pattern itself. Resolution: Alara and Marcus have identified the manifestation of the curse. The Etheria Five trapped in a perpetual, agonizing dance, seeking two new souls to complete their failed protective ritual. They are physically trapped in room 313, and the only way out is through the common area, where the spectral figures are waiting. The immediate danger is not sudden violence, but the seductive, powerful pull of the spirits urging them to join their ranks. The moral lesson extracted here is one of vigilance and self-awareness. True bravery is not just fighting. It is recognizing the enemy's true intention. The hall's danger is subtle and psychological. It preys on fundamental human desires, like the need for belonging or the desire to help, to pull the living into its eternal pattern. Recognizing the difference between a natural phenomenon and a supernatural trap is the key to survival. Alara dragged Marcus fully back into the darkness of room 313, her heart racing. They had to find the artifact mentioned in the journal, the piece that had been torn away, and figure out its purpose before the music of the unfinished dance drew them out into the spectral arms of the Etheria 5. What was the symbol on the torn page meant to do? And how could they possibly use a piece of paper to break a curse woven by spectral dancers? Huddled in the darkness of room 313, peering through the slight opening in the closet doorway, Alara and Marcus watched the spectral figures continue their slow, hypnotic march in the luminous mist of the common lounge. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of their feet and the muffled, mournful jazz created a psychological pressure cooker, urging the living to join the dead. Alara knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The hall was a sentient prison, and it had sealed them in for a reason. They needed to retrieve the ripped page, the symbol of perpetual closure, and understand how it could be used. "We have to get the page," Alara whispered, inching toward the floor. "It's the only thing that proves we didn't just walk out, like John did in 1957. We have to finish the pattern, or break the pattern with that symbol." Marcus was still mesmerized by the ghostly procession. "But look at them. They aren't trying to scare us away. They're trying to draw us in. What if joining the dance isn't a death sentence, but the only way to escape?" As if on cue, one of the dancing figures, a ghostly young woman with tears of shimmering blue light tracing slow paths down her sepia-toned cheeks, broke formation. She glided silently toward their doorway, her movements fluid and purposeful, completely detached from the rhythmic thump of her companions. The temperature dropped instantly. The air around her tasted like frost and old metal. She stopped right outside the closet, her face inches from the gap where Alara and Marcus were hiding, her eyes fixed on Alara. She didn't speak. Instead, she slowly raised her spectral hand, covered in a delicate, vintage lace glove, and offered it to Alara. It wasn't a grab. It was an invitation. Alara felt an overwhelming, unnatural surge of empathy. A sudden, deep understanding of the girl's decades of suffering, the terror of being tethered to this place forever, forced to endlessly relive the failure of her protective ritual. It was a crushing wave of collective grief, and it was powerfully tempting. "Take my hand," the girl's sorrowful voice echoed, not through the air, but directly inside Alara's mind. "We just want it to end. We can show you how to finish it, Alara. But you must understand the cost. You must know what we faced." Marcus tried to pull Alara back, but she was frozen, unable to resist the pull of the psychic connection. The young woman's spectral hand seemed to glow faintly. Alara, the historian driven by a need for complete, unfiltered truth, felt compelled to accept the offer. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold, dry lace of the glove. The contact was not painful, but devastating. In an instant, Alara's consciousness was violently invaded by a flood of foreign memory. She was no longer Alara Vance, the history major. She was Eleanor, a scared, hopeful student in a swing dress. She saw the room not in sepia tones, but in vibrant, terrifying color. She saw the students arguing over the torn symbol, the sudden look of panic on John's face as he realized the ward was collapsing. She felt the crushing psychic force as the hall, originally intended to be protected by the ritual, turned into a vengeful, self-sealing entity. The final, searing memory was Eleanor's own terror as the ancient energy slammed into her, binding her not just to the building, but to her own final, desperate moment of fear. It wasn't just a soul capture. It was a memory loop, an eternal reliving of the moment of betrayal. The vision lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour of pure, agonizing psychic trauma. Alara gasped, ripping her hand back, the sulfur smell suddenly overpowering. She fell against Marcus, trembling, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't a ghost," Alara choked out, her voice thin. "It was a memory exchange. She showed me everything. They weren't cursed by evil, Marcus. They were consumed by the hall because they failed to complete the sacrifice of belonging. The pattern needs to be closed. And the key is that torn symbol." Alara's historian's curiosity, the very thing the hall had preyed upon, had forced the hall to reveal its nature. The entity wasn't just hungry for life. It was hungry for completion. The spectral girl offered the memory, the historical truth Alara craved, as a method of seduction, attempting to overwhelm Alara into voluntarily joining their pattern. But the sheer pain of the experience, the forced empathy of being Eleanor for a moment, had broken the hall's hold. Alara's mind, now armed with the absolute truth, was ready to fight back. Resolution. Alara survived the psychic attack, gaining the crucial knowledge needed to understand the curse. The hall is a self-sealing prison activated by a failed protective ritual, demanding the completion of the exchange of belonging. By enduring the emotional exchange, Alara realized that the spectral figures are not malicious. They are prisoners begging for release, which the hall will only grant if the ritual is either completed by binding new souls, or properly undone by repairing the broken symbol. The moral lesson was profound. Self-preservation in the face of the unknown is critical. While empathy is human, knowing when to stop digging into a history that demands a price is the only way to survive. Alara sought knowledge. The hall offered a painful piece of the truth, hoping the trauma would force her submission. She took the knowledge but refused the final, fatal exchange. Alara, recovering, frantically pointed a shaky finger at the ripped page on the floor. "Marcus," the journal said. John tore the symbol of perpetual closure from the script. "We have to find the rest of the script. The curator knows what it is." They now knew the truth and the required artifact. But trapped in the sealed hall, how could they possibly communicate with the outside world, or find the only living person who knew the true meaning of the ritual? Alara, now driven by the terrifying, forced knowledge of the hall's curse, snatched up the torn page from the floor, the symbol of perpetual closure, and jammed it safely into her satchel. The paper felt strangely cold, buzzing faintly with residual, malevolent energy. "We need the curator," Alara stated, her voice steady despite the lingering trauma of the memory exchange. "Mr. Silas." He knew they were caught in an unfinished pattern. He must have known the original purpose of the ritual script. He's the only key left to undoing this. Marcus, sobered entirely by the terror and now accepting the absolute reality of the supernatural, looked around the dark, sealed room in despair. "How? We are sealed in a time-warped ghost prison, Alara. The windows are 30 feet up, and my phone is a useless brick. We are cut off." "Not entirely," Alara countered, pointing toward the heavy-duty, modern steel deadbolt that had been their first sign of human interference. "The college put that lock here to keep people out, yes, but also to signal that this room is different. If the college knows the truth, there must be a way out, a safeguard." She began frantically running her hands over the walls surrounding the sealed closet door, searching for an anomaly. Her focus wasn't on the antique room, but on the small, contemporary additions. Near the baseboard, hidden behind a misplaced piece of 1950s molding, her fingers found a cold, hard junction box, a modern, concealed electrical access point, clearly installed long after the vanishing. Using the broken piece of the weather vane, the historical curiosity that had opened the door, as a crude pry bar, she leveraged the cover off the box. Inside, she found a simple, two-way communication line, a maintenance intercom, battery-powered and entirely separate from the hall's antique wiring. It was a lifeline, placed there by those who knew the hall's potential to seal itself. Marcus, his tech brain reactivated by the sight of functional electronics, quickly patched the torn communication wires. He cranked the generator handle. A high-pitched, persistent electronic whine cut through the oppressive silence, indicating a connection to the maintenance office. "Silas?" Alara gasped into the receiver, her voice strained. "Mr. Silas, it's Alara Vance. We're in Etheria Hall in 313. The wing is sealed. We're trapped in the pattern." The response was immediate, confirming their desperate hope. A low, panicked gasp, followed by the dry, familiar rasp of the curator's voice. "Miss Vance, you were warned." "Oh, heavens. The hall has locked itself." Alara didn't waste time on explanations. "The symbol of perpetual closure." John tore it from the script and Marcus just tore the last copy. "The hall thinks the pattern is still broken. What is the full script? How do we seal the ward correctly?" Silence stretched over the line, thick with the curator's internal struggle. Finally, Mr. Silas confessed, his voice heavy with generations of guilt. "My family. We were the ones who designed the original ward for the college. We were guarding the hall, not the college. The original 5 were trying to bind the truth of the hall's history to its foundation, to make it safe, permanent." He revealed the terrible family secret. The original student, John, who panicked and tore the symbol, was Mr. Silas's uncle. John wasn't a traitor. He was a terrified young man who realized the required exchange of belonging meant sacrificing not just their future careers, but their very souls to the structure. John's betrayal was a last-minute attempt to save them, but it only activated the hall's defense mechanism. "The symbol," Silas explained, his voice thick with emotion, "it's not just a drawing. It is a mathematical countercharm, a way to unbind the living souls from the hall. The original script is in my office safe, written by my grandfather. You need to use the torn page as the ritual key. It's saturated with the hall's failure energy." He instructed them, "You must get back to the common lounge. The ghost light you saw? It's the central nexus of the incomplete ritual. You must use the full script and place the ripped symbol exactly where it belongs, directly onto the nexus light. It will complete the pattern, not by binding you, but by releasing them." They had the solution. The ritual required a physical artifact, the torn page, and a symbolic act, placing it onto the spectral nexus. They had to return to the spectral dance in the common lounge, facing the very thing that had terrified them moments before. Resolution. Alara and Marcus secured a vital, temporary communication line and gained the complete, terrible truth from the curator. Mr. Silas revealed that the torn page is the ritual key needed to undo the curse by placing it on the central spectral nexus, the ghost light, which is located in the common lounge. They now have a mission: confront the spectral dancers and complete the act of restoration that was betrayed in 1957. The moral lesson they absorbed was one of profound trust and redemption. In the face of insurmountable danger, you must learn to trust unexpected allies, even those who seem to be complicit in the cover-up. The curator was a reluctant guardian, not a villain, and his confession provided the only possible path to freedom, transforming the item of betrayal, the torn page, into the means of redemption. Alara clutched the torn page, now feeling less like a source of terror and more like a tool. "We have to get out of room 313. The nexus is waiting." The rhythmic, muffled thump-thump-thump of the dancers in the common lounge grew louder again, as if sensing their renewed purpose. The hall knew they had a plan, and it was preparing to defend its prisoners. How would they bypass the spectral dancers, And what price would the hall demand of Marcus, the architect of this new betrayal, when they reached the central nexus? With the curator's instructions ringing in their ears and the full realization of the curse's mechanism, the hall binds those who fail to properly close their sacrifice. Alara and Marcus had a clear, terrifying goal. Reach the ghost light in the common lounge and unbind the Etheria 5 using the torn ritual key. First, they had to escape room 313. Alara, remembering the pressure of the rhythmic dancing, focused on the closet door leading back to the common lounge. The dancing hadn't stopped. The thump-thump-thump was relentless, creating a powerful resonance that seemed to actively push against the door. Alara knew the hall was trying to keep them out of the lounge until the pattern was complete. She wedged the heavy marble paperweight against the door, holding it ajar just enough for them to observe the spectral scene. The 5 figures were still moving, their silent dance now faster, more erratic, the luminous mist around them swirling violently. They seemed to sense the presence of the ritual key. They were no longer passive prisoners. They were becoming physically menacing, manifesting as cold, grasping shadows that stretched toward the doorway. "We have to move fast," Alara urged, clutching the torn page. "The hall knows what we're doing. Marcus, you lead. You're faster. The key is to find the exact center of that blue mist. That's the nexus, the wound where the curse broke." Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the terrifying scene. His face was a mask of determination, stripped clean of his old desire for video fame. He had seen the fear, he had caused the sealing, and he had heard the confession. Now all that mattered was survival and, perhaps, atonement. As they slipped into the lounge, the hall struck. It didn't use a spectral figure. It used their own memories. The moment Marcus stepped past the threshold, the swirling mist around the dancers intensified, coalescing briefly into distinct images. A perfectly filmed video clip of Marcus, laughing triumphantly, holding up the torn page. A spectral voice, uncannily like his own inner voice, boomed softly in his mind. "Proof! Look at the views. This is the greatest content of all time." It was the hall's final, powerful psychological attack, preying on his deepest ambition. The curse didn't want his life. It wanted his future belonging. It wanted him to join the Etheria 5, eternally obsessed with his viral moment, trapped in the hall forever. Marcus stumbled, his hand instinctively reaching for the pocket where his phone lay. A useless, dead brick. He had a sudden, wrenching moment of clarity. His desire for fame had led him to disrespect the past, and now the hall offered him eternal, spectral fame as a prisoner. "No," Marcus gasped, pulling his hand away from his empty pocket. "The proof is not worth the price." He looked at Alara, whose face was pale but focused. He realized the true sacrifice wasn't death, but giving up the thing that defined him. His relentless pursuit of validation. He made his choice. He sprinted toward the center of the room, forcing his way past the grasping shadows. The dancing figures now moved toward him directly, their silent, empty eyes locking on him, their outstretched hands cold and magnetic. The lead male figure lunged, his hand reaching for Marcus's chest, the place where his soul, his sense of belonging, resided. Alara followed close behind, yelling instructions. "The nexus, Marcus. Get to the light." Just as the spectral figure's cold hand was about to make contact, Marcus made one final, crucial move. He didn't run away. He deliberately slid on the dusty floor, using the momentum to kick a heavy, antique armchair directly into the path of the nearest spectral dancer. The chair passed through the dancer, but the act of sudden, violent disruption was enough. The dancer's movement stuttered, creating a brief, millisecond break in the unfinished pattern. That millisecond was all they needed. Alara reached the center, where the light was thickest, a swirling vortex of cold blue energy. She slapped the full, reconstructed ritual key, the torn page, combined with a quick, mental overlay of the curator's instructions, onto the center of the ghost light. Resolution. Marcus made the painful sacrifice of choosing safety over ambition, breaking the hall's final psychological trap. Alara, using the momentum of his disruption, placed the ritual key, the torn page, onto the ghost light nexus. The hall's energy screamed as the broken pattern was addressed, but the curse was not immediately undone. It was merely completed and contained once more. The moral lesson they earned with their narrow escape was, sacrifice is the final test of bravery. True courage is not facing danger without fear, but sacrificing personal gain, fame, proof, or ambition, for the well-being of others and for the safety of one's own soul. Marcus sacrificed his need for proof. Alara sacrificed her need for passive historical observation. A terrible, rending sound tore through the hall, an energy discharge that flattened them both against the floor. The blue light intensified into a blinding white flash, then vanished completely. Was the curse truly broken, or had the hall merely resealed itself, leaving a subtle, terrifying change in the world outside? The flash of blinding white light, triggered by Alara placing the ritual key onto the spectral nexus, was followed by a silence so complete, so absolute, that it was terrifying. It wasn't the dead silence of the sealed hall. It was the total absence of sound, as if reality itself had held its breath. Alara and Marcus slowly picked themselves up from the dusty floor of the common lounge. The oppressive sulfur smell was gone, replaced by the faint, fresh scent of rain and damp earth. The luminous blue mist had completely dissipated. The common lounge was still draped in shadow, but the room felt different. It was just a cold, abandoned room again, dusty, forgotten, and blessedly inert. The 5 spectral figures were nowhere to be seen. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the unfinished dance had ceased forever. Then, from the direction of room 313, a single, clear, triumphant sound echoed through the hall. The music box melody. This time, however, it didn't cut off abruptly as it had in part 1. It played the full, complete, resonant note. A perfect, clear progression of chords that ended not on a tone of dread, but one of profound, final release. It was the sound of the curse being satisfied. The moment the music faded, the heavy, metallic sound of the corridor unsealing echoed from the stairwell. The physical prison was opening. Alara and Marcus exchanged a look of exhausted relief and hope. "It's over," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. "They're gone. The pattern is closed. They're finally at rest." They rushed back through room 313, past the old mirror that now reflected only their own pale, relieved faces, and into the corridor. The architectural deception was gone. The endless hallway was once again a short, finite passageway of 12 rooms, leading directly to the top of the iron service stairs. They descended the staircase rapidly, emerging back onto the ground floor foyer. The steel plate door to the loading dock entrance, which Marcus had manipulated, was still slightly ajar. They burst out into the cool, clean night air of the college campus, stumbling onto the dew-soaked lawn. They didn't look back until they reached the safety of the main campus quad. The fog was finally lifting, and the west wing of Etheria Hall was bathed in the pale, silver glow of the moon. They looked back at the large, silent structure, the massive Gothic building that had held them captive. And that's when the final, horrifying ambiguity of the hall's power revealed itself. The west wing of Etheria Hall, the sealed-off Gothic block of architecture that had imprisoned them, was no longer there. Where the wing should have been, stretching from the library annex to the maintenance shed, There was only a plain, unblemished, decades-old stone wall. The seamless masonry was identical to the other functional wings of the college, but it was flat, final, and absolute. There were no windows, no side doors, and most unnervingly, no sign of the loading dock entrance they had just escaped through. The ground was just perfectly manicured lawn, the bushes trimmed and neat. The hall had not merely released its prisoners. It had removed itself from reality. It had sealed the ritual and, in doing so, had collapsed its external manifestation, making its secret permanent and impossible to find again. They had escaped, but the terrifying implication hung in the air. The hall was still there. The curse was simply contained, sealed within an invisible pocket dimension, ready to rematerialize if the pattern was ever broken again. Alara and Marcus, now traumatized and bonded by their shared experience, spoke briefly to the frantic curator over the emergency line before he arrived. Mr. Silas confirmed their impossible sight. It's what the ward does when it's closed correctly. It binds the hall to its own timeline. It will be invisible for decades now. But you must never speak of where you were. The next morning, local college officials confirmed the West Wing had been quietly demolished years ago due to safety concerns. Its footprint now just a part of the lawn. The Etheria 5 were recorded in campus history as having transferred to other institutions. Alara and Marcus both left Etheria College that semester. Marcus, having sacrificed his hunger for fame, deleted all of his online content and transferred to a small, private university far from any coastline. Alara, having seen history's raw, terrible truth, dedicated her life to cataloging forgotten local histories, but never again sought a primary source that was physically forbidden. Conclusion: they had survived, but their reality was permanently altered. The hall was sealed, its secrets intact, and the Etheria 5 finally at rest. The final soft closure was this realization. The hall didn't need their lives. It took their sense of belonging to the college, forcing them to leave forever, making them the final, necessary sacrifice. The moral lesson of their escape was etched into their futures. Prudence and humility are the only shields against the unknown. Live carefully, for some choices, driven by reckless curiosity or ambition, leave invisible scars that bind you to the dark. Even when you escape a curse, the price is paid in the future you are forced to give up. Years later, sitting alone one quiet night, Alara felt a slight chill, a familiar scent of sulfur, and heard, so faintly she questioned her sanity, the delicate, single, tinkling note of a music box. She knew the hall was still out there, waiting in the shadows of time. And she knew that somewhere in the endless dark, a piece of her curiosity, a piece of her belonging, was forever etched into its stone. Did the college truly manage to erase the hall from the map? Or is it merely waiting for the next generation of students with too much curiosity to stumble upon a hidden service entrance?